This section introduces us to congruent triangles. We already talked about congruent line segments and congruent angles. Those are items that have the same measure as each other. So congruent triangles are similar. They have the same shape and size. And if we have two congruent triangles, then their corresponding parts will be congruent. So, a pair of sides that match up between them will be congruent. A pair of angles that match up between them will also be congruent. This right here stands for corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent, and we'll be using it in future sections. But for right now, just know that it means that between two triangles that are congruent, their parts will also be congruent. So here are two triangles, and they're not marked congruent, but I'll just tell you that they are, so that I can show you all of the different parts that are congruent. So these are also drawn in the same orientation just to make it easier to see, but the triangles won't always be drawn in the same orientation. They might be rotated or flipped, so they won't exactly look the same as each other. But in this case, angle A is congruent to angle R. Angle B is congruent to angle S. And angle C is congruent to angle T. Also, side AC is congruent to side RT. AB is congruent to RS. And BC is congruent to ST. Now, if we want to write a congruent statement about these two triangles, the actual names of the triangles matter. It actually doesn't matter how we want to name the first triangle. So let's say I didn't want to stay in alphabetical order. I felt like naming this triangle BCA for the first one. And I want to state that it is congruent to the other triangle. The order of the letters in the second triangle matters, and I want to match them up with the letters in the first triangle because the congruent statement will tell me all of the information about what sides and angles match up with what. So we have to get in the habit of making our congruent statement in the right order. So since angle S matches up with B, I'm going to make that my first letter. And since T matches up with C, I'll make that the second letter. And then since A matches up with R, that'll be the third letter. Since congruent statements are always in this same kind of relative order, we don't even need a picture of the two triangles to tell how they are congruent to each other. Based on just looking at the congruent statement, we can tell which angles match up with which. For instance, I know that this is supposed to have a segment over it. That line segment AC is congruent to XZ since A and C are the first and last letters of the first triangle's name, and X and Z are the first and last letters of the second triangle's name. So AC is congruent to segment XZ. Similarly, angle B, that's the middle letter, matches up with angle Y. So B and Y are congruent to each other. It can be a little tricky trying to write a congruent statement when we have the two pictures of the triangles like we have on this slide and they're not drawn in the same orientation. We might have a hard time figuring out what angle matches up with A and B and C, especially when it's the sides that are marked congruent. So what I do is I see that angle A is the first angle, and that over on the left triangle, it is the angle formed by the side with 1 mark in it and the side with 3 marks in it. So I'll just find that same angle over on the other triangle, and I can see that angle S is the angle here that's formed by the side with 1 mark in it and the side with 3 marks in it. So S will be the first letter of this name. Angle B is formed by the side with 3 lines and the side with 2 lines. And that matches up with angle T, which is made with the same 2 lines on this triangle. And then the only angle left is angle R, so we can assume that that matches up with angle C. We can visually check it just to make sure, but the proper way to name the second triangle here would be triangle STR.